If you redraw what we have said until now, we have a situation in which the U.S. is not the hegemon, the benevolent hegemon that keeps security in this continent or in the Euro-Atlantic alliance. Russia and Ukraine pause a war indefinitely. We don't know until what point. But there's a line of friction created between Russia and Europe as a whole, if we count Ukraine as part of the new continent, right?
Yes.
And so we live in a situation in which the unfinished conflict zone starts on the borders of Ukraine and Russia and goes or may go into the Western Balkans.
Well, first of all, if we say, and I agree with this analysis, the zone of unfinished conflicts, if this zone starts in the border between Russia and Ukraine, it also means it starts on the border between Poland and Ukraine, because that's the country that is affected. Will it move into the Western Balkans? Russia will certainly try. If we go country by country, I would wonder what can they actually do. We do not know how the conflict between Christian Schmidt and Milorad Dodik is going to finish in Bosnia. Whatever you think about the OHR, the Office of the High Representative in Bosnia, I have a critical view of it. But whatever you think of it now, with the new government coming in, Schmidt will have a lot more support from Germany. He had support so far, but he'll have a lot more support to use the bond powers and to go, to do whatever it takes to take Dodik out. Will he win? I don't dare to make a prophecy. Serbia, well, you follow it as much as I do. It had always pro-Russian tendencies, but Vučić has systematically strengthened them. There's no comparison to the public mood today to what it was in the last Tadić years. And then we have student protests, which in my opinion lead nowhere. So for the time being, I think Vučić is the factor to count in, not the opposition, not the students. What else do we have? Bosnia, well, Kosovo. Kosovo at least is not prone to any pro-Russian sentiments.
Montenegro.
Sorry? Montenegro. I was just saying I had the chance to meet your prime minister yesterday for a chat, and I wanted to understand, if Vučić moves into the north, I don't think he would do anything else, but moving into the north, I think is not excluded that he plays with these with this scheme. Could you rely on Camp Bondsteel? Because it was off the record, I will just quote my question. I don't know what you would answer, what you would think. Could you rely on Camp Bondsteel? I know at the time when I can ask you questions hasn't come, but I cannot.
Sure. No, we can continue this way.
Perfect. Oh, that's much more convenient for me.
Yeah. No, I think the it's not only Camp Bondsteel, but it's this joint kind of response, which includes Great Britain, Turkey, and several other countries. So
I mean, Camp Bondsteel, I meant metaphorically in a way.
Yeah, sure. I think the message is quite clear, actually, against Vučić on this issue.
So you feel there would be, if he did something?
I think there's already a political message that has been sent to him. There's been a security message that has been sent to Serbia. And I think President Vučić is in such a situation that I don't think he would need additional trouble to the troubles he has right now.
Yes, but sometimes, especially when they are in difficult situations, politicians tend to use a way out. But I agree, in this case, it's not realistic.
Yeah. No, I raised this issue of unfinished conflicts, and we can continue it as a conversation whenever you want, because there are two ways that linked communication between the Western Balkans and Russia. We've had, for the first quarter of the century, the lines of friction between Kosovo and Serbia and the lines of friction within Bosnia and Herzegovina were actually lines of friction between Russia and the West. Russia trying not to allow that this region become European and NATO. And so far it has succeeded in the first quarter of the century. Now, having tested the weaknesses of the West, or the lack of will of the West to actually create a free and united Europe, which is what should have happened in the first quarter of the century, Russia tested further the will of the West throughout the Georgia and to Ukraine. And Ukraine was actually the big test, starting with Crimea and the little green men, and of course the Donetsk, Luhansk. So Putin has a vision of history which Europe does not have. And of course, dictators and autocrats can have this because they spend a lot of time in power, so they see things differently time-wise. But now we are in a situation in which the unfinished conflict zone is actually interlinked. And whenever the line of friction between Russia and Ukraine gets pacified to an extent, it could be reignited here in one form or the other. That's one element. And the other element I want is to use Andrić's quote again, which is, "In our country, hatred is a habit." And it's something that was unimaginable in Europe, the way we saw it from the periphery, that hatred and the far-right sentiment has actually increased in Europe, something that was so common here. So now we are exporters of new dimensions, we, the Western Balkans.
That's a lot you put on the plate there. I'll pick some elements and take the liberty to react only to parts of what you said. First of all, Ukraine. I lived in the Ukraine in the 90s. I lived in Russia in the 90s. And I remember when living in the 90s in Kiev and traveling vastly within the Ukraine, I kept thinking, wow, what this country could mean for Russia if it was only democratic and not as corrupt as it is. Because in the 90s, Ukraine was just as, if not even worse, well, just as corrupt as Russia. Yeah. Utterly corrupt. I mean,
people say even today.
Yes. Now, since I do not travel to Ukraine anymore that often, I'm kind of hesitant to make too strong worded statements about it. I think it has become better here and there, which doesn't mean much because in the 90s it was really, you could buy everyone and everything, more or less. But I kept thinking, and you could see, of course, Ukraine, in a way, for Russia is the most important country of the world, because it is the most important model, and many Russians have family relations. They look to Ukraine. They correspond with each other, and a democratic Ukraine governed by the rule of law, of course, is very dangerous for Ukraine. And NATO, in my opinion, is not the biggest danger for Putin, but democratic European
prosperous,
prosperous, but even prosperous, which would come automatically, I would suppose, by the rule of law, as you can see it here in modest beginnings. A rule of law brings economic upturn. So such a Ukraine would be a huge, huge danger for Putin, much bigger than in the Western Balkans, because it's just not so important, not so close to Russia. And what you said about Russian involvement, let's not forget they also took hits here. They did not want Macedonia in NATO, but they had to accept it. And if you look, I was in Macedonia in 2017, 18, 19, very often when the name question was solved, and then the referendum about the name change. Russia was involved behind the scenes, but not very strongly. We were involved very, very strongly. Merkel traveled to Skopje to try to talk then opposition leader Mickoski into not boycotting the referendum. Von der Leyen, then German Minister of Defense, came. I remember meeting her there for an interview on so we invested a lot, and then we destroyed everything by not following up and living up to our words, which is my biggest fear as far as the Western Balkans is concerned. It's not so much Russia undermining the process, but us, the European Union, undermining what's left of it, and there's not much left.